Well, good morning again. We have reached the third part of this series called Not Your Average Church. And if you've not been here, what we've said is basically this. Jesus was never your average teacher. You know, the very first week I got up here and talked, I said he came as a religious leader, but he didn't gravitate towards religious people at all. And that was not normal. That was not anything that anyone had ever seen. And very quickly, he set up patterns of behavior that were above average, beyond average, not your average. And if we're going to be a church that follows after Jesus, the truth is we shouldn't be average either. We should do things that set us apart, but that line us up with more of who Jesus is. We should go down a path where other people would say, well, religious people actually do this stuff. And we should say, well, Jesus was a religious guy, but he didn't do this stuff. Jesus was a religious leader, and we believe he was the greatest religious leader ever, but he didn't do this stuff. And today you're going to hate me because you have enjoyed the entire weekend away from work, many of you, not had to think about your job, not had to think about responsibilities that are going to face you tomorrow morning, and I want to spend the next 30 minutes talking about your jobs. And I want to do this because this is an area in our life, for many of us in the room, where we locate a lot of meaning and purpose. Now, the average Christian is a person, and we know this, especially if you've grown up in church, you know the average Christian serves, right? This is something we do. We give back. We work. We work in the local church. We serve our whole life. Jesus says the Son of Man came to serve, not to be served, but to give his life as a ransom for many. We take that on. We're like, yeah, we're going to serve. But sometimes, in the midst of our serving and our work and our vocation and our calling, sometimes we find the greatest sense of meaning until we don't. And I remember this really clear. The first time that I was ever on a job, it was a super dirty job. It was nasty. It was this first moment in my life where I received the feeling of meaninglessness. Anybody ever had that feeling? You might experience it right now where you are in your job. But I was in my senior year. It was the summer of my senior year of high school. And I sat on a 2-acre plot of land with a chainsaw and a rusty old axe. And my dad told me and my younger brother, who was 2 years younger than me at the time, and my foster brother, who was worthless. No, he was great. I love him. But in terms of that weekend, it was awful. Or really that summer it ended up being. But we had to clear the entire plot of land with a rusty chainsaw and a rusty axe. Like, that was it. I mean, it was probably, that chainsaw I know was older than me. There's absolutely no doubt about it that it was older than me. And he told me to go out there. And, it was kind of like one of those summers where you'd be like, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the summer where my brother had gotten so fed up with it, he hopped up on top of the pile of wood and he started chopping it and just kind of, and all of a sudden he chopped that axe right through his big toe. And we still to this day were like, you just wanted out of the job. Like, that's the only thing. You're like, I'll figure a way to get out of here. I will chop my toe off. And he did. So more power to him. That was great. You know, it was the same summer where my dad decided between a fight between my grandfather would show up. Anybody have a grandfather who just shows up just to tell you how to do things? You ever have that? You know, they're not going to pick up that axe or chainsaw. That's not in their portfolio. But they'll tell you how to do it. And so my grandfather and my dad were fighting over where to fall this tree. And my dad was serious. He's like, I can fall this tree wherever I want to fall this tree. It's going to go down. It's going to go exactly where I want it. And Grandpa's like, you're going to fall that tree into those power lines right there. And Dad's like, it's not that tall. It ain't going to do it. And they went back and forth. And us, the three boys are loving it because we're just getting to sit down the entire time. They're like, you guys fight it out, whatever. Give me the water, So we're just loving this. All of a sudden, my dad's like, I'm going to fall that tree. And he comes over with a chainsaw, knocks it down, and sure enough, he knocked out half the power to West Asheville that day. It was a beautiful moment, especially for all of us to see this enormous arc that hit the sky as soon as he landed on those power lines. And literally, this is no joke, like 2.5 minutes later, 4 or 5 giant power trucks roll up, like flying in as if they're an ambulance rescuing things. Like, they came on the scene, scavenging the damage. Like, what happened out here, And it was a good summer. It was a good summer. But there were lots of moments in that summer where I'm either picking up a chainsaw that is no longer starting, or picking up a chainsaw that's blade has once again gone dull, or picking up an axe that is worthless, and I'm questioning my meaning. What purpose does this serve in my life? And I would ask the question, what does it all mean? Or does it mean anything at all? Was there any meaning in this moment for me? And I think you and I probably all had these moments. Hopefully they're moments and not kind of consistent seasons in our lives. But we have these moments when we stop and we look at the situations that we're in. We look at those things around us and we ask, what does it all mean? I mean, why am I not getting the job that I wanted? Or the promotion that I want? Why am I stuck with this job and it doesn't seem like anything's changing? Why can't I work any longer? Like I thought I'd work for a few more years, but this happened and I'm not going to be able to do it. What am I going to do for a job at this point? I don't have a job. I don't have anything that I find meaningful for me to do. And in the midst of a dirty job like the job that I just described or jobs that you might have, it's really hard to find meaning. And let me just be clear, this is not, it's not like a sermon just for the good old hard-working American out there. Like, that's not what this is. Like, every job is dirty, right? In a dirty world, every job gets dirty. From the factory line to the cafeteria line, the janitor to the educator, to the blue-collar worker, the white-collar worker, the doctor, the nurse, like, every job gets dirty. In fact, when I was first preparing this sermon, I had a conversation with a surgeon who spends the vast majority of his days doing colonoscopies. Now, in case anyone thinks that's a glamorous job that you want to attain to, just imagine showing up for your child's show and tell day or parents' day or whatever. Like, what do you do, Dr. So-and-so? And you pull out the rod. Like, well, I take this every single day, multiple times a day. This is not a glamorous job. But for some reason in our society, we want to say that, these jobs are good. We romanticize jobs like surgeons or rocket scientists or lawyers, but the truth is they get dirty, and we all get dirty in whatever job we are in. Even when we take time to look back at Scripture, the jobs, the callings, the ministry efforts that take place in the lives of individuals in Scripture, we can't help but notice that in one way or another they all get dirty. In one way or another, serving God and serving His people is dirty work, and there's no way to get around it. There's no pushing past it. It's just a part of our reality. And there's one person that I just want to focus on this morning. His name is Joseph. And Joseph landed in a really, really dirty job. In fact, Joseph landed in a series of dirty jobs. And he would assume, and this is something that's different from a lot of others, he would assume that the dirt of his life could be made meaningful now. He didn't have to sit in it and kind of wait for some hereafter where finally it would all make sense. Joseph assumed that whatever situation he was in life, in that situation, there could be found meaning. Even when we take time to look at his jobs and we look closely at him, we see this assumption over and over again. We understand that we live in a dirty world. And we understand that in that dirty world, there are dirty jobs all around us. And Joseph understood the same thing. But what Joseph understood, and what I hope we'll understand by the end of the day today, is this. Dirty jobs are made meaningful when we make meaning out of the dirt. Dirty jobs can be made meaningful in our lives and are made meaningful in our lives when we make meaning out of the dirt. Like many of our jobs, Joseph started out, it didn't seem like a dirty job. In fact, it seemed like a dream job. In fact, it was a dream job. He was called to be a dreamer. Like, can you imagine that job? Like, all I have to do is dream all day and then tell you what it means. Like, that seems like a pretty cushy job that God has called him to. He's given him this responsibility to get dreams. In fact, this is how Genesis chapter 37, verse 5 opens up. It says, once Joseph had a dream. And it's great. But Joseph's job gets dirty really quick, because if we read the rest of the verse, it says, and when he had told it to his brothers, told the dream to his brothers, they hated him even more. Like, now they were kind of at odds with their brother already, but he starts to tell them what his job is, and this just plants some more hate in their heart. And, I mean, we've all probably gone through these situations where we think one thing about our job, we think it's going to be great, we get like 2 or 3 weeks in, and we're like, what did I get myself into? Like, what is happening here? And there's the culture shock, and there's the adjustment, and Joseph had that. But Joseph answers a question that I think we all have to answer today. It's how do we handle it once we're in it? You see, how did Joseph begin to make meaning out of the dirt? That's the really important thing. And what I want us to do for the next couple minutes is look at 2 possible solutions that are embedded in this story. One of them is a good solution, one of them is not so good. And the first one is the one we come upon in the next few verses. If you scan down to verse 18 and 19, it reads this way. The brothers, they saw him from a distance, meaning Joseph. They saw him coming. And before he came near to them, they conspired to kill him. Now, right here, we've got a second job introduced. Joseph is the dreamer, but apparently the brothers are the killers. They're the mob in the story, so this is their job. They put people in trunks or bury them in concrete, whatever you want to say. But this is their job. They conspired to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer." They go on. "Come now, let us kill him, throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him. We shall see what will become of this dreamer." Now, I'm not going to read it, but in the next couple verses, what we see happen is Joseph comes up to the brothers, he approaches them, and they strip him of his garments, the first item that they hated. They hated his coat. It was ugly, something straight out of like the 60s or something like that. They strip him of the garment. They throw him into the pit in the middle of the dirt. And by the time we get to verse 25, we find the first not-so-good solution to deal with this problem. We're no longer talking about Joseph's plight, right? We're stopping Joseph's concept of dreaming for just a minute. Now we're just looking at the brothers, what their job is, and how they're coping with the messiness of their job. Because, if your job is to kill someone, that gets messy, right? It's just a byproduct of the reality of a murdering job. Like, that's what happens. But we get to see a little bit more about it here. We see from their perspective, they're dealing with this dirty job of offing their brother. And here's how it goes. Their solution is simple. We want to make the best out of a bad situation. We've got a bad situation in here, but let's make the best of it. And I love this, it's beautiful. Judah's like trying to offer a compromise in the whole story. So all these brothers are sitting around thinking about what's going on, and Judah steps up. He's like, "You know what, guys? What are we really going to get if we kill him? Like, that doesn't make sense, does it? Why would we kill him? I don't understand." He goes, "Maybe what we can do is sell him. Don't you think that's a better idea? Like, if we sell him, if we kill him, we're not going to get anything, right? He's dead, he's gone. We can maybe blame it on some animals. But if we sell him, now we get to gain off of this situation." And so Judah enters this conversation, and as he's coming in, he's like, this is a win-win all the way around. Joseph doesn't die. We get a little bit of money. We still, think that their dad thinks he's dead. It's great. Nobody gets the blame for it. It's a win all the way around. And whether we like it or not, here's the truth. This is the way that you and I often operate. We operate this way, trying to make the best of a really bad situation. And sometimes we do it, not always, but sometimes we do it to the neglect of other people around us. It doesn't matter what happens to the other person in our situation. We're just trying to make the best of our situation. So if somebody gets hurt or somebody gets knocked out or somebody gets kind of pushed out of the scenario altogether, it doesn't matter to us because we're trying to gain for ourselves. So we strive for this personal gain. We strive for this in our scenarios. And the truth is, and this is where Joseph comes back in the story. The truth is, these decisions that we make when it comes to our vocations and our calling and our service and all that we do in life, it's not really just about other people. And that's the mistake we make. Sometimes we step back and we say, you know what, well, what is this going to do for them, or how is it going to hurt them, or how is it going to help them? And we kind of enter the scenario like Joseph's brothers. Now, Joseph's brothers didn't care necessarily how it hurt other people, but they were mindful of it. But Joseph entered it from a different angle. You see, Joseph realized that it's not about what our decisions do to other people, it's what our decisions are doing to ourselves. Each decision that we make, what Joseph's brothers failed to do that day was ask, what is this decision going to do to me? It had an impact on Joseph, it had an impact on other people, it had an impact on Joseph's father and the rest of the family because they were upset that Joseph was gone. But what did it do to the brothers? That's the real question. And what do our decisions do to us? You see, our vocations don't necessarily lead us to something better, but they can definitely shape us into something better. And each decision we make vocationally, each decision we make personally, each decision we make on behalf of our family, yes, it may have impact on other people, but the truth is when we enter into this decision-making process, we're entering into a place where we are shaping ourselves. At the end of our lives, we're not going to be defined by what we do or what we don't do. We're not going to be defined based on the type of work we are, how much we succeeded at that work, but we will be remembered for the mark that our character left. We will be remembered for these things. And Joseph knew that. And that's why Joseph took a different path in the story. The truth is, Joseph did get sold into slavery. His situation did get worse. But it's in the middle of Potiphar's house, the slaveholder who held him, that Joseph decided to make meaning out of the dirt of his existence. And so we find 2 chapters later, in chapter 39, it says, "So Joseph found favor in his," being Potiphar's, "sight, and he attended to him. And he," Potiphar, the owner of the house, "made him an overseer of the house. He put him in charge of all that he had." You see, unlike Joseph's brothers who made the best of a bad situation, Joseph didn't make the best of a bad situation. He redefined a bad situation by making it a great opportunity. And some of you are like, that makes no sense at all. That's just preacher talk. I don't get what that is, right? Well, let me make 2 observations of what Joseph did to try and help unpack this. How did he do this? Let me say 2 observations, and then I'll offer you 2 questions to think about, and we'll be done. Number 1, the first thing Joseph understood was this: the difference between a dirty job and a dream job is in the worker, not in the work. He knew that it didn't have anything to do with the circumstances around him. Joseph wasn't working on the transformation of his circumstances. He was working on himself. He was doing something to change himself. He was, as he remembered it, the dust that needed meaning. Not the work around him. The work around him is often the confusing part. We think that's the dirty part. The truth is we're the dirty part. He remembered the story that his father and his grandfather told him that was found in the earliest parts of the Scripture, where it says, "Then the Lord God formed man," or humanity, "from the dust of the ground and breathed into their nostrils the breath of life, and they became a living being." See, Joseph knew this. He knew that I am the dust. I'm the dirty thing that in one way or another needs meaning made out of me, and I can be reshaped again and again and again. And on days when our work seems to be the dirty things, and the days when our tasks seem to be the dirty things, Joseph remembered that the dust that needs to be made, the dust that needs to be made meaningful, is not our circumstances. It's us. Our mistake in life, in work, is that we often work with the hope of doing something better rather than becoming something better. And Joseph worked in the opposite way. Joseph wanted to become something better over and over again, and it obviously helped him to do things better and better. But the beauty of our dirty jobs is that dirty jobs have the ability to transform our character. The more we dig in, the more we participate in what God has called us to, they have the opportunity to change us, to help us become something better. So when you're at work, or when you're volunteering, or when you're doing acts of service in the community, and you're struggling with issues like, you know what, why am I not paid well enough? Maybe it's time to ask the question, is this an opportunity for your work to work on humility in your life? Or when you face to face with that reality where your bosses or your supervisors are expecting more of you than you can do, ask yourself, is this an opportunity for me to take on God's strength and to allow Him to shape me? When you face those situations where you can't believe that someone would hold that grudge over you, my gosh, that was like 6 months ago. Why are they still holding me to that? Take time to ask yourself, is this an opportunity for me to practice forgiveness? For me to do something different? And when you have those like rude and obnoxious coworkers that we all have, and it's just hard to deal with, maybe it's time to ask ourselves, is this an opportunity for God to expand my capacity for love? For me to be able to experience His love and give His love in a different way. You see, this is what Joseph understood. Joseph discovered that every opportunity for work was an opportunity for his work to work on him. And so it must we. And the second and final thing that Joseph knew and Joseph observed in his life was that meaning is found not in the receiving of praise, but in the giving of it. Joseph understood that making meaning out of the dirt is only possible when we give credit to the one who made the dirt to begin with. When we properly align who we are with who God wants us to be and properly align ourselves back in connection with Him, that's the moment where we can start to make meaning around because we've rightly aligned our gratitude. There's something that happens in our lives when we practice gratitude that changes everything around us. Something in us changes when we rightly align our priorities. But what's amazing about this is how contagious this attitude becomes. The moment that we take on gratitude, the way that changes everybody around us and the way they see us. It's what moves us from just being your ordinary average workers to immediately becoming extraordinary and well above average. I mean, throughout Christian history, there are lots and lots of examples that I could give to you of stories of gratitude, of people who've acted out of this gratitude, but one of them is particularly striking. It actually comes to me from the 13th century, and it was a young sculptor. This young sculptor worked on Salisbury Cathedral. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but this is an image of it we have here on the screen. This is Salisbury Cathedral. It's an amazing, amazing place. Construction began for this in 1220, and it ended in 1258, 38 years later. It only rests 4 feet below the ground. The foundation is not that deep. But this sculptor was given the opportunity, as an apprentice, he was given the opportunity to make one of the spirals in this tower. And he wasn't given one of the low ones because the really good sculptors were given that. So like if you're a master sculptor, you would get a gargoyle that was like really low and everybody could see it as they came in the door. But the ones who were the worst, the ones who were just starting, they got the gargoyles all the way at the top of this cathedral. At the very highest spiral, which was 404 feet tall. This is where they were. And this is where he would land his gargoyle. And if you go on tour of this, the tour guide will immediately tell you when you come in that he immediately sat down with this gargoyle and he started carving. And months went by and he was carving, and all of a sudden he grabbed his hammer one day and he just came over and smashed the gargoyle to pieces. And everybody kind of stopped and looked as the smash echoed throughout the chamber. And he went back to work. And he worked again, and he worked for weeks and weeks and weeks, and he brought out this gargoyle again, and he picked up his hammer again, and he smashed it again. And the echoes went throughout the chamber. And this time, even though everybody was shocked, the master sculptor comes over to him, possibly a mentor, and he goes, "Young man, I don't understand what you're doing. I mean, you do know that this is going on the very top of the cathedral, right? I mean, this is going," and here's what he says. Let me read it to you. He goes, "This is going to the place where no human eye will ever see what is being done. Why on earth would you destroy months and months and months of work?" And the young sculptor looked back to him and he said, "I'm not making this for any human eyes. I'm making this for him." You see, this young artisan knew and understood that the greatest pleasure we will ever experience is not in the praise that we receive, but in what we give. It's in what we do for the honor of our Creator, when we rightly align ourselves and give gratitude to Him who has given so much to us. It reminds me of what Paul said to a group of slaves who surely were struggling with their duties. He said to them, "Whatever your task, put yourself into it as done for the Lord and not for your masters." You see, we get confused sometimes to think that our work is assigned for some human being, but what Paul is reminding us all of is that our work is ultimately for Him and for His glory. And so whatever your work, put yourselves into it as done for the Lord and not for your masters. So let me end with these 2 questions. Where are we today? How is your work working on you today? I mean, we're all in different seasons of life. Some of us have retired. Some of us are wishing that we could retire. Some of us are struggling day to day with a job that does seem somewhat meaningless. Some of us are at the beginning of new jobs and new steps in our lives. But in all of these situations, the question still remains, how is your work working on you? And even more to the point, as you think about how it's working on you, ask this question. I ask this question. What's the dream job that God has for you? Is there a dream that God has placed in your heart, and as you plunge through each and every day with your work, are you in one way or another stepping into that dream? If you aren't, what is it going to take to make the next steps in your life? What type of courage, what type of encouragement from the rest of the group is it going to take? What's it going to take to push you into the place where you realize the dream that God has for you, not assuming that that's going to get rid of the dirtiness of that job, but believing that that is the best place where God can work on you? If it's true that dirty jobs are made meaningful when we make meaning out of the dirt, then how are we making meaning out of the work that we're all called to? How are you making meaning of wherever you are? Whatever place you will sit this week or in weeks to come, And in what way is God working in your life through that work? Let's pray.